So imagine inheriting this, like, grand old house from your family. It's got good bones, history, maybe it's a little drafty in the winter, but there is one major catch.
Oh, there's always a catch with old houses.
Right. Always. And in this house, right in the middle of the main hallway, there is a locked door. And for at least 3 generations, every single woman in your family has actively pretended this room just, doesn't
They
exist.
just walk right past it.
Exactly. They tiptoe past it. They avert their eyes. If they hear a strange noise coming from inside, they just like turn up the radio. No one asks for the key. No one ever talks about what's behind the wood. And today's deep dive is really about what happens when you, the new owner of this house, finally decide to stop tiptoeing, find a crowbar, and just kick that door off its hinges.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a profound shift in how we handle what we inherit. And usually, to explore a cultural or familial shift of that magnitude, we're wading through this massive stack of sources like sociological studies, historical timelines, behavioral data.
Yeah, looking for a needle in a haystack.
Right, exactly. We're used to digging through mountains of text.
We are. Our typical deep dive is, well, it's an exercise in volume. But today, the source material that you, our listener, brought us is entirely different. You didn't give us a mountain of data. You gave us a single, incredibly potent sentence.
It's honestly amazing how much is packed into it.
It really is. It's an excerpt from a source titled Guiding Her Growth, a mother's manual on menstruation. And the excerpt simply reads, let me quote it here. Explain menstruation to a 10 to 15 years old girl my mom never did, and I want my daughter to be informed.
It's just striking. It's, just a handful of words, but it contains an entire sociological narrative. Like, we are looking at a real-time attempt to rewrite a family's fundamental operating system regarding bodily autonomy, education, and stigma.
Yeah, it's massive.
It really is. Because this isn't about biology or clinical anatomy. It's about the mechanics of breaking a generational cycle.
Right, and let's start right there with the phrase that carries, arguably, the heaviest historical weight in that sentence, which is, my mom never did. We have to look at the anatomy of that silence, I think.
We do, yeah.
Because in the context of our locked room analogy, that silence wasn't necessarily born out of, like, malice from the previous generations.
No, not at all. Often it was actually the exact opposite. Historically, within families, silence was heavily utilized as this misguided form of protection.
Protection, like keeping them in the dark to keep them safe.
Yeah, exactly. The prevailing cultural logic for a very long time was that if you don't speak about taboo subjects, bodily functions, puberty, menstruation, you somehow preserve a child's innocence.
Oh, wow. So if I don't acknowledge it, it's not happening.
Right. And you have to remember, the older generation felt immense cultural discomfort or perhaps religious taboos or simply a deep internalized shame about their own bodies. So the protection they offered was just avoiding the topic entirely. They didn't have the tools, so they just stayed quiet.
Okay, but let me push back here a little bit, because if we're looking at this listener, and her mother never talked about this, her absolute default setting is going to be awkwardness. Like, her nervous system has been trained for decades to associate this topic with shame, or at the very least, extreme discomfort.
Oh, absolutely. The anxiety is baked in.
Right. So how does simply deciding, that she wants her daughter to be informed, how does that magically override all that internalized taboo? Doesn't she run the risk of just projecting her own deep anxiety onto her daughter during this conversation?
Well, that is the pivotal challenge of breaking a cycle. Right there. You can't just flip a switch in your brain and erase decades of learned behavior. The anxiety is going to be there.
You can't just pretend you're fine with it.
Exactly. But the mechanism that prevents her from just passing that anxiety down is the conscious externalization of the deficit.
Wait, what does that mean in practice?
So by explicitly stating my mom never did, she is taking the shame, which usually lives internally as a personal flaw, and dragging it out into the light as a puzzle to be solved.
She's naming the ghost.
Precisely. She's naming the ghost. Once you name it, it loses its power to paralyze you. And notice her immediate action. She doesn't just try to wing it and stumble through a highly anxious conversation.
Right, she explicitly seeks out a manual.
Yes. When your own vocabulary is tied up in generational anxiety, you borrow a new vocabulary. You lean on a structured guide until those words become native to you. The awareness of her own lack of education is the exact catalyst driving her to build a better architecture for her daughter.
That makes a lot of sense. She's like using the negative space of her own childhood to shape something solid.
That's a great way to put it.
And I think that ties directly into the specific title of the resource she is pulling from, right?
Yeah.
Guiding her growth. I mean, it's not called Managing the Monthly Crisis or How to Deal with the Inconvenience of Biology. The phrasing guiding her growth implies a very specific pedagogical approach.
It really does. It frames the biological event not as a sudden traumatic imposition, but as a completely natural, positive milestone. And the word guiding is doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
How so?
Well, it implies walking side by side with someone through unfamiliar territory. It completely dismantles the old, deeply flawed paradigm of the one-off talk. We all know the trope of the awkward sit-down lecture delivered behind closed doors, usually way too late, and just shrouded in euphemisms.
Oh, yeah, the dreaded we need to talk moment where everyone just stares at the floor and wants to disappear.
Right, the worst. And guiding is the absolute antithesis of that. A guide is a constant, reliable presence, pacing the information to match the traveler's capacity.
It's like the difference between giving someone a detailed map before they set out on a massive hike versus just waiting for them to trip, scrape their knee, and then handing them a Band-Aid.
Yes. Handing them the map changes everything.
Because if you hand them the map beforehand, the journey is still going to happen. I mean, they still have to walk the miles, their feet might hurt, they might get tired, the terrain might be really rough. But they know where the mountains are. They know where the rivers are. They aren't just lost in the woods.
And we really have to look at how having that map being informed, as the listener stated, actually functions in a developing brain.
Right, the physiological side of this.
Exactly, because being informed in this context is far more than just knowing where to buy products or understanding a biological timeline. It is fundamentally about altering a young person's psychological baseline.
Okay, let's break down that mechanism, because a young brain, especially right around the onset of puberty, is essentially an ambiguity reduction machine. It craves patterns, it craves predictability.
Desperately.
So if a young girl's body suddenly begins changing, acting unpredictably or bleeding, and she possesses zero cognitive framework for why this is happening,
Yeah.
what is the actual neurological response?
It triggers a profound threat response, like immediate panic. The brain perceives a sudden, unexplained physical anomaly as danger. The amygdala fires up, cortisol spikes, and you enter a state of fight or flight.
Oh, wow, so it's a literal survival reaction.
Pure survival. When a child lacks information about their own changing biology, their imagination is forced to fill in the blanks. And the human imagination, when faced with an unknown bodily symptom, almost universally defaults to catastrophe.
Right, the internal monologue becomes, I'm sick, or I'm broken, or something is terribly wrong with me.
Exactly. So the silence that the previous generations thought was protecting them was actually just leaving them completely defenseless against their own stress response.
That's heartbreaking. So the silence is the trauma.
The silence is the trauma, yes. But when you provide the map, when you ensure she is informed, you're providing a cognitive scaffold. You're giving her the logical framework to process the physical changes. Predictability breeds confidence.
So she knows what's coming.
Right. When the changes happen, the brain doesn't hit the panic button because the prefrontal cortex can step in and say, wait, I read the manual. I know what this is expected.
It downregulates the fear.
It entirely removes the element of shock. And by doing so, you are freeing up an immense amount of cognitive and emotional energy. I mean, instead of spending her adolescence terrified of her own unpredictable body, she can spend that energy on her education, her social development, her hobbies.
It gives her life back.
Basically. By guiding her, the mother is telling her, your body is functioning perfectly, and I am your partner in navigating this.
Which brings us to the logistical reality of how to actually deliver this guidance. Because timing is everything, and the listener specifically asked how to explain this to a 10 to 15 years old girl. That is the exact demographic window targeted by the manual.
And it is arguably the most volatile, critical window in human development.
Seriously, let's talk about why that specific 5-year span requires such a targeted approach. Because from the outside, a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old are practically different species.
They really are, night and day.
I look at this window like a massive mandatory software update happening to a computer in real time. The system is fundamentally rewriting its entire operating system while still trying to run everyday programs.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The interface is glitching out, the cooling fan is running incredibly hot, background apps are just crashing constantly, and the user, the daughter, She desperately needs the release notes for this update before it initiates, so she doesn't just panic and try to unplug the machine when the screen goes dark.
The software update analogy just perfectly captures the internal chaos of that age range.
Yeah.
The 10 to 15 window is the epicenter for this manual because it is the period of the most aggressive, physical, hormonal, and social transition.
Everything's changing all at once.
The growth mentioned in the title is happening at warp speed. But your point about the difference between a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old introduces a massive pedagogical challenge.
Right. How do you scale a manual across that gap? Because a 10-year-old might still be playing with dolls, right? Her primary concerns might be recess and avoiding homework. But a 15-year-old is likely navigating the brutal social hierarchy of high school, complex peer dynamics, dating, intense academic pressure.
They are living in two different realities.
Exactly. So if you hand them the exact same information in the exact same way, one of them is going to be completely overwhelmed and the other is going to just tune out entirely.
And this is where we return to the concept of guiding as a continuous process rather than a static event. You don't read the entire manual aloud on day one. You deploy the information based on her immediate developmental terrain.
Okay, so break that down for us. What does the guidance actually look like at the starting line, around age 10?
Well, at age 10, the objective is foundational and preemptive. You're laying down the vocabulary before the software update actually triggers. The conversations are likely shorter, they're more clinical, and they're focused on normalizing the biology.
Like explaining the hardware.
Exactly. What are the organs involved? What is the biological purpose? You introduce these concepts in a low-stakes, safe environment so that the information can marinate without the pressure of immediate application.
You're removing the shock value long before the event occurs.
You are handing over the release notes while the computer is still running normally so she can read them over a cup of juice.
Over a cup of juice. I love that.
Yeah.
So you establish the baseline that these words are, safe to say out loud in your house.
Exactly. It's just normal conversation.
But then we fast forward, let's say she's 13, 14, 15. The update is either installing or has already installed. The hardware changes are apparent. How does the guidance shift then? Because if you are still talking to a 14-year-old about basic anatomy, you're really missing the reality of her lived experience.
The shift is from foundational to highly operational and nuanced. For a 14 or 15-year-old, the biological mechanics are no longer abstract concepts. They are her daily reality. So the guidance has to pivot to tackle the practical and social complexities.
Like the logistics of navigating a school day.
Yes. How do you manage symptoms when you have to sit in a math class for an hour? What is the social protocol if something unexpected happens? But it goes even deeper than logistics.
Oh, so.
This is the age where you begin guiding her through the hormonal impacts on her mood and energy levels. You help her track her own patterns so she can anticipate when she might feel fatigue or irritable, which gives her agency over her emotional regulation.
Ah, I see. You're moving from teaching her the biology to cementing her bodily autonomy.
And that requires the manual to be an open architecture. It has to be an ongoing dialogue where she sets the pace through her questions. A 15-year-old needs a sounding board way more than she needs a lecture.
Right. She needs to feel heard.
She needs to know that no matter how complex or embarrassing the social situation feels, she can consult her guide without judgment.
Which really brings us full circle to the very beginning of our conversation, because that open dialogue, that ongoing scaled guidance, is the absolute antithesis of the locked room.
It really is.
The listener who sent us this source isn't just unlocking the door, she is renovating the entire house. She is making sure her daughter knows exactly how every room works, where all the light switches are, and that no door will ever be locked to her again.
It is the ultimate transmutation of a deficit into an asset. She identified a void in her own life, recognized the damage that void caused, and systematically built a structure to ensure her daughter would never have to experience that specific kind of isolation.
It is deeply impressive. So let's distill the core insights from this single, powerful sentence.
Let's do it. First, we have the mechanics of breaking the cycle. Acknowledging, "my mom never did," is not an expression of defeat. It is the vital first step of externalizing generational shame. By naming the silence, you strip it of its power and create the space for a new vocabulary.
Right. And second, we explore the neurobiology of being informed. It's not just about biological trivia, it's about providing a cognitive scaffold. By replacing ambiguity with predictability, you prevent the adolescent brain from defaulting to a threat response, you downregulate fear, and build psychological confidence.
And finally, the pedagogical reality of guiding her growth during that 10 to 15-year-old window. It requires scaling the information. It moves from preemptively normalizing the vocabulary at age 10 to actively managing the social, emotional, and physical complexities of bodily autonomy at age 15. It is a continuous, evolving partnership.
I want to take a second to speak directly to you, the listener who brought this to us, because we dissect a lot of complex topics on this show. We look at massive societal shifts and global trends. But true, tectonic cultural change almost always starts exactly like this.
It does. It starts small.
It starts in quiet, unglamorous moments where one person makes a conscious decision not to pass down the anxiety they inherited. You took the negative space of your own upbringing, the lack of guidance, the locked door, and you are actively forging a key for your daughter. You're doing the heavy, foundational work to ensure she navigates a confusing world with a map in her hands. That is an incredible generational gift.
It really is. The pioneer generation, the one that decides to break the silence, always bears the heaviest cognitive load. They have to learn the language from scratch while simultaneously trying to teach it.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. A concept to mull over as you begin having these conversations. Whether she's 10 and you're just laying the groundwork, or she's 15 and you're navigating the complexities together. You are doing the exhausting work of being the pioneer right now. You are dismantling the stigma because your baseline was silence. But think about the long-term compounding interest of that choice.
That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. Fast forward 20, maybe 30 years from now, if you successfully guide your daughter's growth today, if you normalize this entirely and provide her with that unwavering cognitive scaffold, how will she eventually explain this to the generation that follows her?
The starting line completely changes.
Exactly. When your daughter sits down with her own child, she won't have to break down a door. She won't have to externalize a generational trauma or borrow a vocabulary from a manual. Because for her, the door will have never existed. Her baseline will be total, unapologetic communication. The vocabulary will be native to her. You're doing the hard work today so that for her, it will simply be effortless.
A legacy of silence transformed into a legacy of complete transparency.
And that is how you change the world, one sentence at a time. Thank you for sharing your deep dive with us today. It's a brilliant reminder that sometimes the most profound knowledge isn't found in a mountain of data, but in the courage to ask a single vital question. Until next time.